Good morning, everybody. Welcome, board members and guests, to the Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. We welcome the public to in-person participation. In addition to remote teleconferencing, participation is available to the board members and the public pursuant to provisions of Government Section Code 5493E. Due to the COVID-19 state of emergency proclamation and recommendations for social distancing, there will be multiple opportunities throughout the meeting for public comment. After I open an item for public comment, those joining us by webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button on the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you're joining over the phone, you can press *9 and PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. For those joining us in person, you're welcome to come to the podium. We ask that anyone making a public comment state their name and city of residence. You will then have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak, and we will notify you when your 3 minutes are up. If you're experiencing technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during this meeting, please email your comment to solvisabol, SSABOL, at PCTPA.net. Because this meeting is being conducted via teleconference, all votes will be roll call votes. Board members will be asked to state their name prior to making a motion or a second motion for the record. Once an item has been moved and seconded, I will request the clerk to do a roll call vote. Would you lead us in the pledge?
I would be happy. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Bonnie. Roll call.
Baker,
Here.
Broadway,
Here.
Burris,
Here.
Dowden Calvillo,
Present.
Gore,
Here.
Howdeshelt, Joyner,
Here.
Jones,
Here.
Wilkins.
Present.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you, Sylvie. Mike Lucan, AB 361 remote teleconferencing.
Morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Board of Directors. We have again on the Board of Directors calendar the request to adopt Resolution 22-22, which would allow us to meet via remote teleconference in accordance with state rules and guidelines. We've had this item on our agenda for a number of months. The board has asked us that when the appropriate time comes that we phase this out because of the increase in occurrence of outbreaks with COVID-19 and its variants of late. We've continued to bring this back and to allow that remote teleconferencing to occur. We think it's prudent to continue it. This is looking out at the next meetings. We think it's prudent to have that on the calendar at this time. We can always, as we get closer to the next meeting, if you so desire, direct staff to discontinue that use. So,
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Any conversation from board members?
Move approval of the item.
I'll second.
Motion second.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Gore,
Aye.
Howdeshelt,
Here.
Joyner,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Wilkins.
yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. I have a motion for approval of action minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move approval.
I'll second the motion.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris, Burris. Dowden Calvillo.
Yes.
Oh, got it. Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Gore. Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones. Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Agenda review, do we have anything there?
No changes today, recommended by staff.
Thank you. Moving on to public comment. Do we have anyone in the public wishing to comment on anything that's not on today's agenda? Perfect. And we'll move on to consent calendar for Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. Does anybody have any items they wish to pull?
Nope.
Anybody in the public? Nope. All right, can I get a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move approval of the consent calendar as presented.
God, she's quick.
I'll second.
Aye, second.
I think Suzanne got
I
that.
even waited.
You'll learn to be fast on the board.
Baker.
Aye.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Gore. Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones. Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to consent calendar for Placer County Airport Land Use Commission. Does anybody have any items they wish to pull? Anybody in the public? Seeing none, entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Baker.
Aye.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Gore.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Now open the scheduled 9 o'clock public hearing for the adoption of the PCTPA Title VI program, Public Participation Plan and Limited English Proficiency Language Assistance. Mike?
Thank you, Chair Baker. Good morning, members of the board. Mike Costa, Senior Transportation Planner. Before you open the public hearing for this item, I wanted to give a little bit of background on what the Title VI program is for Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. Some of you may be familiar with the Title VI process in your respective agencies, but just a quick overview of that process. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act established protections for 3 separate classifications of populations based on race, color, and national origin that basically said that none of the programs or services or activities that are administered with federal funds can discriminate against those classes that you see on the slide before you. In 1973, the classifications were expanded to add additional protections to sex and then age in 1975, and then disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1973 and 1990, respectively. So Title VI essentially encompasses protections for those 6 categories, which if an agency is receiving federal funding like PCTPA, we have to ensure that our programs and services do not discriminate against any of those categories for any individual. So again, why does Title VI apply to PCTPA? Title VI essentially is applicable to PCTPA and actually all of your member jurisdictions due to the fact that we receive federal funding. And PCTPA administers and receives federal funding through the Federal Highways Administration, and we administer it in 4 separate programs, mainly our programming authority, as well as our planning functions, both the regular planning and environmental design, and also our environmental planning and review processes. And then we also utilize federal funding for the purchase of right-of-way. However, we don't purchase the right-of-way through PCTPA. SPARTA does that, but we do still administer the funds for the right-of-way process, and those are federal funds. How have we addressed Title VI in the past? Some of you may remember back in 2018 in September, PCTPA did actually adopt a Title VI program, which included a public participation plan as well as a limited English proficiency language assistance plan, or just LEP plan for short. In that plan, the program or the plan itself was created and established utilizing the Federal Transit Administration's guidance, which is very typical that you see in many different RTPAs and MPOs. However, in reaching out to Caltrans, that plan typically has to be updated every 3 years. And in the process of reaching out to Caltrans, our administrative authority for Federal Highways Administration funds, it was determined that those guidance was no longer applicable to PCTPA because we receive FHWA funds, not FTA funds. And so we had to comply with the FHWA, or Federal Highways Administration guidance, which is a little bit different than the FTA guidance established for Title VI. In the FTA's guidance, it only covers 3 protections. In the FHWA, it covers all 6 protections. So therefore, we had to update our plan to include commitments that covered all 6. In addition, we don't actually utilize any FTA funds in our current programs. So we wanted to make sure that our Title VI program actually reflects the fact that we use FHWA funds and not FTA funds. A little bit of the differences, as I mentioned, between FHWA and FTA fund requirements. FHWA's Title VI program requirements cover all 6 classifications, whereas FTA's cover just the 3. And also in FHWA's requirements for Title VI complaints are actually processed and administered by Caltrans or directly by the FHWA. Whereas under the FTA's process, we had actually administered the complaint process for Title VI. So that's changed a little bit now in our new program, is that our complaint process is immediately handled or administered, or any complaints that we receive are sent over to Caltrans, or people can file them directly with Caltrans and the FHWA. So we no longer administer the Title VI complaint process in our program. The other changes administratively in our Title VI program under the FHWA program is that there is a much clearer delineation of our organization's program areas, which I defined earlier on the previous slide, as well as kind of how we train our staff in Title VI processes and procedures. And then a new element is actually what's called the annual goals and accomplishments that we have to establish as part of our Title VI program, where staff, or the Title VI coordinator, which is me, would be looking at our program areas to ensure that on an annual basis we evaluate how we address Title VI in our different programs or projects or processes. So we have to do that on an annual process and then just keep that in our records. Similar to the FTA program that was adopted in 2018, our current Title VI program also includes and incorporates the Public Participation Plan, or PPP, as well as the Limited English Proficiency Language Assistance Plan, or LEP, plan into the Title VI program. So those 2 elements are actually incorporated into our Title VI program. As I mentioned before, I'm not going to go over all of these, but we do establish in our Title VI program a Title VI program coordinator, which is the senior transportation planner position, myself. So if anyone has any questions about PCTPA's Title VI program, they are sent over to me. I'm also responsible for training and keeping the program up to date, so to speak, under the executive director's authority. In terms of the complaint process, as I mentioned before, complaints are no longer administered by PCTPA staff. Those complaints, if we receive any, which we have not yet to date, are actually sent over to Caltrans directly, and then Caltrans can either process those complaints or forward them over to the FHWA for administration, and then we would receive the outcome of that and correct accordingly if necessary. In terms of our PCTPA Title VI Public Participation Plan, we do maintain the 3 goals that were established in our previous Public Participation Plan, which essentially is to increase awareness of our PCTPA programs, foster many partnerships with your agencies as well as respective agencies in this region, and also engage in minority, low-income, or limited English proficiency populations throughout our many program services and functions. We do define in this proposed plan that is before you today, we do define our public noticing requirements for our public hearings as well as our workshops and or any other meetings that we have, as well as document those minutes and document the outcomes and any public comments that we receive during those meetings. And then we also focus, as we did in 2018, but more so now in the post-COVID world, on our digital outreach and making sure that all populations within Placer County region have access to our programs and services through digital means, as well as still in-person community engagement. In terms of our LEP plan, the LEP plan under Executive Order 13166 is required to have 4 different elements, and those elements are the 4-factor analysis that you see before you. In our region, under the safe harbor provision, which is established by the United States Department of Transportation, we are required to translate important documents or documents considered vital documents for populations that either exceed 5% of our county's population or 1,000 persons. It's an either-or situation. And so in our region, for PCTPA's programs, we are required, and you can see it in the chart, and I'm sorry if it's small, but in the chart before you were required to translate any vital documents, mainly upon request for at least Spanish and Tagalog languages, because they meet the minimal thresholds for the safe harbor provision. Now, our requirements for our Title VI program are not necessarily translatable to your member jurisdictions. This is solely for PCTPA's programs. Your respective jurisdictions would have their own Title VI program that would have their own thresholds or their own data analysis as part of what languages need to be translated, as well as what outreach mechanisms suit your respective jurisdictions. So this is only applicable to Title VI program for PCTPA. The other thing that I'd like to mention too is that it is in our past history, from what I have seen, it has been very infrequent that we have had requests for translation services. Mainly Spanish has been the language, but that also has been very infrequent in our processes. In terms of next steps, should the board adopt the Title VI program before you today, that Title VI program would be sent over to Caltrans for their final incorporation. They've actually reviewed the draft document already, and comments from Caltrans staff have been incorporated in the document before you today. A public hearing notice for the public hearing today was released in early June. We didn't have to do that, but we wanted to actually hold the public hearing in order to allow for any public comment and participation, especially since the public participation plan is part of our Title VI program. So again, not required, but we did incorporate that public hearing process into this adoption of this document. So with that, if there's no other questions, staff does recommend that the board hold a public hearing for this Title VI program as it's currently proposed. And then should there be no additional questions, comments, or concerns, staff recommends adoption of the Title VI program as it's proposed before you. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Mr. Chairman, I do
Yes,
have just
go
a
for it.
really quick question. Thank you very much. I appreciate the overview of Title VI. And I understand the 6 protected classes, but I thought that there was also the 7th, which was from religion. Is that only at the state level?
I believe so.
Okay.
Under the federal guidance that I've seen so far, it's only those 6 protected classes, at least under the Federal Highways Administration.
Okay, yeah, because I've always known there to be 7, and the 7th was religion, and you couldn't really incorporate it under any of the other 6, so, okay, so, all right. That was really the only question that I had.
Perfect, thank you. Anybody else have anything?
I have-
Trinity? Oh, Bonnie.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. As far as outreach materials, right? So we've got a Spanish-speaking population. Would we do materials in Spanish, like digital ads for like to get awareness, et cetera? Just trying to think about how you might engage with communities that don't speak English. I noticed that like some of the materials in here were in Spanish, but would you do something like digital ads in Spanish, especially in areas where you have to do some outreach, maybe transit areas?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Director Gore. I think that the way that the Title VI program and the public participation plan is laid out is it gives us options. And I think for any campaign that we're considering specific to a project or specific to an effort that we're doing or a planning administrative function that we're doing, we can consider appropriately translating certain materials or making general materials or public announcements in alternative languages that we would anticipate interacting with in the process. So for instance, if it was a effort that could potentially involve a low-income or limited English proficient population, we could very well proactively translate some of our materials so that if there were questions or there needed to be translation services, we would know that ahead of time, and also encourage them to be part of the process too.
Great, thank you.
The only area that we have done that a little bit is when we did the Placer Sacramento Gateway Plan. Because we're doing it in partnership with Sacramento County, who has much larger populations in that area, we did engage through our consultant, AIM Consulting, translation services and that type of thing. But other than that, we have not received any requests. But it's not a bad idea to look at that in the future, like with our funding strategy and other items.
Well, and it may not be requests, but I think about, like, we have populations in Lincoln and in Roseville, so those communities can outreach to their areas. But when you're talking about transit across the region, across Placer County, folks are utilizing transit services and actually making sure people are aware of them via, people use these a whole lot more than they do a flyer and a mail or some type of thing. So it's just one of those thoughts of when we have projects that these folks are more likely to use, it would be important to communicate with them in their language.
Yeah, and there's actually on our next item on the agenda, we're going to talk about marketing a little for transit, and so that's an excellent idea. So,
And just to follow up, it might even make sense to do some of that when we're dealing with the polling for the proposed, or the, sales tax issue in South Placer County, to utilize some, marketing or some research or some outreach that's done in Spanish as well. I don't know if we've done that. I'm relatively new to the agency, but that makes sense there too.
So the polling is done randomly, and FM3, if we were to randomly select a high propensity voter that was Spanish speaking, they do have those services available.
Okay, great.
I would say we haven't yet, but
Okay.
that is available in case someone is called or emailed and they say, well, we speak Spanish, either through our prior consultant FSB or FM3. Those services are available.
Good, thank you.
Perfect. Any, Bruce?
Yeah, just to follow up on Supervisor Gore's comment. I recently discovered there's a QR code that will provide translation services. I don't know how it works. I don't know if you have to set your phone to a different language, but just a suggestion. And then I may have misunderstood the distinction, but we also have maybe not 5%, but pretty close to East Indian population, so Punjabi or Sikh or other languages like that. But that QR code, because I discovered it because we're concerned about dry wells up the valley, so we're trying to figure out how to get outreach materials available. The question I have is, disability is covered? Is it covered?
Yes, that's correct.
And I know the state struggled with making their information available for the hearing impaired, for the sight impaired. Do we have that same obligation here?
We do, yeah, and I cannot speak in terms of the history of this, but I know that it is something that's protected in our Title VI program.
And before you answer, Mr. Lucan, so is this just for outreach or is this for all material?
It's essentially it leaves it up to, if there's a request, we're obligated, of course, to honor the request for any additional services, translation, or making something accessible to a member that is requesting that accessibility. But typically our agendas or our main documents that are announcing a public hearing or public event we try to tailor them to be accessible in all forms, or to provide the option if someone needs extra accessibility for a disability.
I know the state struggled with modeling and very technical information on how to get that up, so I think what they did is they propped up an FTP site. If anybody requested that information, then it could be had. Thank you.
The only thing I was going to add is that our current website, PCTPA.net, does have the ability to translate into a number of languages, and we have actually in our OWP for the coming year an update to our website to actually do more enhancements in terms of languages or disabilities along those lines. So,
Thank you.
Perfect. Anything else from the board? We will open this public hearing and take public comment. unless Trinity had something.
No, I feel like the board's comments have been very thorough. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, seeing no public comment, we will bring it back to board for direction.
Move approval of staff's recommendation. I'm looking, is there a resolution number?
Just adoption.
Oh, adopt resolution. I would move to adopt resolution 22-21.
I'll second.
Perfect. We have a motion and a second.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Gore,
Aye.
Howdeshelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services fiscal year 22-23 budget adoption. Mike, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning again, members of the board. This item before you is a follow-up to the adoption of PCTPA's fiscal year 22-23 overall work program. It's actually complementary to it. It is the adoption of our Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, or WPCTSA, CTSA for short. It's budget, and there are many elements that tie back to the OWP effort. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the different elements of the budget for you. I would also like to announce that there are members, representatives from some of our programs here today to speak about their respective programs in the budget when I get to those line items. So I will introduce those members as well as we go through the budget. Starting with the budget revenues, and as many of you may be aware, the chart before you identifies our $2.7 million in approximate revenues that we identify for fiscal year 22-23. This is an increase of approximately 14.5% comparative to last year's budget. A large portion of this increase is consistent of carryover that we anticipate from this current fiscal year into next fiscal year, and that carryover is due to some cost savings that we have recognized from either the short-range transit planning efforts not starting until next year, and also some of the savings in our programs that we had from the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. So that carryover revenue is programmed into respective programs for fiscal year 22-23. Our local transportation funds and state transit assistance funds are consistent with the fund estimates that the board adopted back in February of this last year for fiscal year 22-23 under the Transportation Development Act guidelines for the PCTPA programs. The CTSA is allowed to acquire up to 4.5% off the top from the LTF and STA programs, which is what's reflected here in the budget revenues before you. The 1.3 million is the LTF, or local transportation funds, estimate for fiscal year 22-23, and the 133,000 is the STA fund estimate that was adopted in February for fiscal year 22-23 that the CTSA can claim up to. So that's where those amounts have come for the budget for revenues for fiscal year 22-23. And at any time, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. I'm going to go ahead and now go over to operating expenses. The operating expenses for the CTSA administrative operating costs are essentially 2.3 million is the overall operating budget, and of that amount, 380,000 is the administrative costs for the CTSA program. Those administrative costs are consistent of two major categories. One is PCTPA staff administration of the CTSA's programs, and that administration cost of $209,000 approximate dollars is consistent with what was adopted in your fiscal year 22-23 PCTPA OWP. So that amount is directly translated from the OWP over into the CTSA's budget. The other large portion that consists of administrative costs, as Mike had mentioned earlier, is actually dedicated to outreach efforts that the CTSA staff, myself, would like to conduct with coordination and collaboration with our public transit operators, as well as our CTSA social service transportation providers like Seniors First and others, to really help promote the many programs and services that we have here in the county. And the importance of that, it can't come at a better time post-pandemic, when many of our public transit services and also our social service transportation programs have been significantly impacted with demand or awareness because of the pandemic and the impacts to just people staying at home. And so we really want to commit in this proposed budget $150,000, which is, as you can see, about triple the amount of what we've done in the past to outreach, direct campaign outreach services, as well as producing materials, marketing events, and other types of marketing efforts that we would do in collaboration with our public transit operators and also Seniors First and our other social service transportation agencies to promote CTSA programs and public transit services in our county. And we have 3 operators: Auburn, Roseville, and Placer County Transit. So that's what the category of 150,000 is for in that in the budget. That kind of concludes our administrative expenses. I am now going to go into our various program expenses. Starting with the Placer Rides Independent Living Partnership, that program expense line is actually a reoccurring line for assistance. It's a renewal subscription fee for a program that helps support, a software program, I should say, that helps support our Placer Rides reimbursement program, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that $10,000 essentially is consistent with the annual renewal fee subscription for the Placer Rides software program. The second line, the Placer Rides Seniors First line, is essentially the cost of the Placer Rides program as it's administered by our partner, Seniors First. This is the second year of Seniors First administering the Placer Rides program, and the budget amount that you see before you, the $481,000, is consistent with the 5-year budget that was adopted as part of the contract that CTSA has with Seniors First that was adopted back in June of 2021 for this 5-year program effort. Before I talk any further about the rest of the budget, I wanted to introduce Stephanie Verstra, who is the Executive Director of Seniors First. She is actually attending virtually in this meeting today, as well as Deborah Tyler, who is the Program Manager of the Placer Rides program here in our region, to talk a little bit about the Seniors First administration of the Placer Rides program.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Ready. Placer Rides. Placer Rides has been a really exciting program for us over the past year. Go to the next slide, please. Seniors First is a small private nonprofit. We have 23 employees, of which 2.5 are dedicated specifically to the Placer Rides program. We also have an information and assistance line, which I manage, and we take between 460 to 700 calls a month, averaging about 460 calls a month from seniors and their families. Over 20% of those calls are related to transportation. In addition, we are the Meals on Wheels provider for Placer County. We serve right now about 440 folks in Placer County. We deliver 5 meals a week to those folks, and that program is primarily staffed by volunteers who take the meals out on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Next slide. In July 1st, 2021, My Rides and Health Express, which were the previous programs we administered for WPCTPA, ended, and we started the Placer Rides program. Our previous program with My Rides was a volunteer-based program. So we recruited volunteers, people called and said we need a ride, and we were doing anywhere from 250 to 600 rides a month for folks. What I do want to mention right now is that those were one-way trips. A lot of people have trouble thinking in terms of one-way trips. I get that question all the time, how'd you get them home? It's another one-way trip back home, so that's how they were counted. Health Express was a bus that came and assisted people in getting from home to primary medical appointments, many of them out of the county. So on July 1st last year, we started our new program called Placer Rides. The program components are 3 primary components. One is information and assistance and education. One of the things that we do with that is to help people find alternative transportation. We're not the only form of transportation. We talk about the bus systems. We talk about the ambassadors. We talk about transit training. We also look to other funding mechanisms, such as the VA provides vouchers for folks to travel. So we want people to be educated about all their opportunities with the hope that they're going to use, we're kind of the last resort, is what we're looking for here. The Placer Rights program, as it emerged on July 1st of 2021, is a reimbursement program. WPCTA provides funds for us to reimburse people up to 200 miles a month at a cost of 58.5 cents a mile. And then the third part of our program is what we call last resort. We are able to provide with funding through WPCTPA at least 2 rides a month to medical appointments if someone cannot find a driver. The major change of the component from My Rides to Placer Rides was that people now need to find their own ride to get there. So we spend a lot of time helping people figure out who can drive them. How would you get there if I wasn't there to help you with a ride, so that we can use our reimbursement program. Next slide, please. The eligibility criteria for the program is quite broad, and you have to be 60 years or older, or low income, or disabled. It's not a combination of any of those programs. And I'd like to throw in right here, the youngest person that we have ever transported was 5 days old, and the oldest person was 97. I love that. Thank you, Alice. So I love the fact that we were able to transport a newborn baby to his first doctor's appointment. Family was unable to get them there any other way, so that's why we had a 5-day-old out there. Okay. So Placer Rides has currently 421 enrollees in the program. The first 3 quarters of the year, we processed 251 reimbursement invoices for a total of over 3,000 one-way trips. Over 24,000 miles were driven there, and was funded at $14,288.82. Those reimbursement checks are written to the rider, who then in turn cashes the check and pays their driver. The last resort rides, we provided last resort rides to 97 individuals for a total of 331 one-way trips over 6,000 miles, and it was funded at $29,046.15. Keep in mind, that's the first 3 quarters of the year. Some of the challenges that we've encountered. One is just changing any program. We had a lot of resistance. Our volunteers were not happy that they were no longer volunteers for Seniors First. Seniors were saying, how am I ever going to find somebody to help me with this? The nice part was with the transition that My Rides already had helped people build a system of support for transportation, so they were able to fall back to the people that they'd already developed, and we started folks thinking about having a center of support. How can we help you find people to drive you? Our churches have come to the forefront for some of these, and other agencies have also done so. Obviously, Placer County is a really interesting county for me to work with, because we have our large population areas, which are like Auburn and Roseville. Then we have all those other small areas like Applegate, Forest Hill. So it's been a little bit tough finding folks that are willing to go out, or even commercial transporters that are willing to go out to the rural areas. The population we served have more challenges sometimes than we imagine, with mobility, cognitive functioning, as well as the opportunity to be able to use the center of support that they may currently have. A lot of folks will tell us when they call, I don't have anyone, my family doesn't live here. And I'm going to give you my dad's favorite quote. When he turned 85 years old, he said, my friends are either old, sick, or dead. So so we act as a support system to help them do that as well. And then again, of course, the last thing, the ongoing COVID isolation has caused people to think differently about getting out and about being transported. So what we've done, and I'm going to show you quickly here, I did leave some on the front table outside. We developed a transportation handbook. We printed 20,000 of these. It was in conjunction with one of our partners, the Healthy Brain Initiative. They wanted this to be developed as part of their program, so we developed the handbook in conjunction with the TOG. They did a review for us. We made major changes with it because of things they suggested to us. So we have the probably first 33-page handbook out there that talks to you about how you can get around the county. And what amazes me is when I get calls that say, I have your handbook, I just wanted to be sure I got this right. And so people are using it. We have over 7,000 out in the community already. They went out to major places such as Lincoln Hills living areas, Sun City, all the Del Webbs, our low-income housing developments, our public agencies, Adult Protective Services, and several other public agencies that want to work with us. Also, disbursement was through the Aging Disabilities Resource Connection, the ADRC. We are an extended partner and have helped develop that particular agency. Our major partners there are Area 4 on Aging, Placer Independent Resource Services, Del Oro Caregiver Resource Center, and also in collaboration with the County Adult System of Care. During the year, we did a rider satisfaction survey about January or February. We did it 2 ways. One was over the internet through SurveyMonkey, and then second was we called 150 people that were registered with us to ask about their services and see what they thought. Also, it was a great opportunity for us to do some outreach and explain how the service works.
Deborah, do you want to mention the ADRC recognition as well?
Okay, I was going to do it last, but I'll do it now because this is pretty exciting. AARP has certified the Placer County as an age-friendly community. Recently, on May 31st, the announcement came out that Placer County was considered for this certification. There's a lot of factors that they looked at. There's 2 of them. One is the Aging Disabilities Resource Connection, which has brought all of these agencies together as a collaborative unit. And the second one that was most exciting to me was that revamped and rider-centric Placer Rides transportation service that replaced earlier models and is expected to cover 800,000 miles annually with more than 300 unduplicated riders. So I have some of those at the front, and also Mike has the link to that. That recently came out, so we were mentioned in both of those as part of what Seniors First has done, and other agencies, obviously, as well as our partners. Presentations we've been out doing, we do have like a 12-slide show that explains how the program works. The first people to call us wanting to have us talk about Placer Rides was the public agencies. Adult Protective Services, they actually require their people to obtain an application and register with us. In-home support services, the Healthy Brain Initiative, and we are going to be doing some presentations online for Healthy Brain Initiative, and one of those presentations will be geared at Placer Rides. They'll be recorded and left on our website as well so people can look at it. And recently we've been collaborating with Placer 211 Connecting Point. My staff and I spent 2 meetings with them during their staff meetings, and they recorded those as well so they better understand our program and are distributing our materials for us. I've gotten many, many calls from Sun City, Lincoln Hills. They have a number of different groups, and we've done presentations with them as well, and they're very excited as far as senior communities go. Next slide. So community impact. Here you see a slide of our executive director. She was recently at an outreach event in Lake Tahoe with Placer Protect. We are a member of Placer Protect as well. So Stephanie was up there and able to hand out our materials, which people were very interested in transportation in Lake Tahoe, which, by the way, is included in our handbook as well. I want to tell you just a couple of real brief stories. Our job is as easy as helping somebody get a ride back home from the emergency room. We recently had an 87-year-old woman that had that was from Colfax. She got to the emergency room. She lives alone on 3 acres. And she got to the emergency room when she wasn't feeling well by calling 911. And they were ready to discharge her, and they called us because she is registered with our program to say, can we take her home? So we had a lot of questions, right? She allowed us to talk with her nurse so we could set up a ride, and we paid for the ride and got her transport home and with about an hour and a half. That one kind of took our breath away because we were very concerned about sending someone home alone at that age who'd just been in the emergency room. The good news is we have a lot of commercial transporters that are trained to work with folks. They walk them to the door, they check the house for them before they leave. And if there was a problem, they would call us. So that's an easier call for us. 2 days ago, I took a call from a lovely lady who is 77 years old, and she is a sole caregiver for her husband, who is 74. A critical piece of their discussion was that he weighs 350 pounds. He had just needed to get into the hospital, and a ride was arranged to get him to the hospital where he had surgery. And she and I were talking about how we were going to get him back home when the time came. So we needed to be aware of when that might happen. And discharge can be an iffy thing. We don't know when you're going to go home. In this particular case, she also shared with me that she had slept 12 hours straight the day he had his surgery. She didn't realize how tired she was. So that's when we shift into the information and assistance mode. And what we shared with her were options that where she could get additional help. We talked about the option of having the husband go to rehab instead of coming directly home. Maybe not so much for him, but for her to get a 5 or 6 day break. So that was part of our conversation. We referred her to Della Oro Caregiver Resource Center, where she may be able to obtain some respite funds. We talked about other alternative funding that may happen for her. And you may not know, on July 1st, the state of California is moving to a new eligibility criteria for Medi-Cal services. They're moving from an asset limit of $3,000 for a couple or less to an asset limit of $195,000. Many people are not eligible to Medi-Cal in California today because their assets, they may have $20,000 in the bank. That means you're not Medi-Cal eligible until you get it down to $3,000 if you're a couple. In this particular case, this woman was informed of the change that's coming. She cried on the phone because they would be eligible to Medi-Cal benefits, and then he would be eligible to in-home support services, and she may either be paid or be able to find a caregiver to help her at home with him. So it turned into that type of a phone call. The other lucky thing is my ADRC navigator was in my office that day. We brought her into the conversation, and she is now assisting this family with not only transportation referrals, but also in helping them discharge from, he was discharged actually to rehab for 5 days at least. So she's helping them with that, and then the discharge home again in the future. So we have a really broad job as an agency when we're working with folks. It's quite exciting for us. And this is where I was going to mention the age-friendly community. So thank you for allowing us to be part of this and being able to have that piece to help Placer County senior citizens.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. No questions?
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, question and a comment. I'm gonna go comment first, question second. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, oftentimes we sit here and transportation is about bridges, rail, roads, funding, you know, navigating through the process to get to it. What you've done in your conversation is talk about the human aspect. You know, you talked about seniors, but we know it's about students trying to get to school. It's about, you know, folks trying to move up in their job, and having transportation alternatives is certainly part of that. So thank you for your presentation. I want to make sure I understood something. My question is, you pay the person who does the ride, and then that person then pays the driver?
That is the model, yes.
Why isn't the driver paid directly?
Good question. When the program was first presented to us, and this is based on a program that Riverside County has been doing since about 1996, this is the model that they have. We did ask that same question, why would we do this? When we were operating the My Rights program, we paid our volunteers directly. It took that middleman out. There was a concern about potential fraud. This is the way the program is designed right now to do that. So far, we have not had any problems with it. I can share one kind of interesting story with you. We received a call one day from one of our clients who wanted to know why we were donating money to her. She got a check in the mail and she wasn't sure what to do with it. We don't donate money to clients, so we pretty much were sure that it was part of the RIDE program. She was a little bit confused and not sure what to do. We haven't had any problems with it, but it was the way the program was initially designed. There are some functions in place with software and the way we review the invoices that come to us that also ensure that there's not going to be fraud involved, which was a big concern for several of our staff. But
You reassured me when you said you haven't had any. For the drivers who are, or the contractors, they're made whole.
Good.
And Director Hodeschel, if I may add real quickly, the program is designed, as Deborah had mentioned, it's modeled off of several existing programs. And the design of having the program pay the passenger so to speak, versus the driver limits and reduces a significant amount of liability that the program has to transport the individuals, because we are no longer liable for it through that kind of disconnection. The other part of the Aspect program that Deborah had mentioned in terms of tracking, the software program that I mentioned earlier that's funded through the budget line that I talked about earlier, that $10,000, that software program, which is readily established, also utilized by the other partners, the other public agencies throughout California that have this same type of program, that helps us to also track, and it's called Trip Track, actually, the program, but really track the rides and the reimbursements in a manner that is financially responsible for the program too. So again, this is modeled off of many different existing programs that work throughout the state, and it helps us remove some liability to the program and lower the actual administrative costs.
Great. I have one more question, suggestion. Roseville has a seniors commission. I don't know if you've been there. I think they have a meeting coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Certainly would be a logical place to, either have a video presentation or, show up and make them aware of it.
We'd be happy to do that.
And I'll make one last comment, is that having sat on the Older Adult Advisory Commission for about 6 years, you guys have done a really good job. You've come a long way. I'm glad to see all the publications that you've put together and everything. So, great job.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to echo my colleagues' sentiments. Really appreciate the service that you provide, and this is really a great example of a life service. It isn't, we're not just about those roads and bridges, as you mentioned, and so thank you very much for the services that you provide to our citizens. It's wonderful, so really appreciate that. You provide some independence, and I think that's very important to our older citizens. So
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else? All right.
To continue on with the budget discussion, one of the next line items that I'd like to address is tied back to our outreach efforts for the CTSA that I mentioned earlier, for not just the CTSA, but our public transit operators. Under the Executive Director's Procurement Authority, back in May of this year, we hired a consultant by the name of Trinova, and the consultant is Jean Folletta, who joins us today on the screen there. But Jean actually has an incredible amount of knowledge and experience, both in roles that she served under San Joaquin Regional Transit District, where she was not just their director of marketing for one stint, but she was also their chief operating officer as well. So she very much understands public transit, and she was the transit manager for the city of Elk Grove too. So she has that experience. And then Jean also had done some, she was the program manager / director of the CTSA program down in Stanislaus for the Stanislaus Council of Government. So she has a lot of relevant experience and knowledge in the operation of CTSA programs, including down in Stanislaus, they operate a program called MOVES, which is the same as our Placer Rides reimbursement component. So Jean is joining us today. If you have any questions of her, please feel free to ask, but she is the consultant that is assisting us with helping to both develop and then implement the marketing plan and strategy collectively with our transit operators and also our CTSA providers like Seniors First and other transportation social service agencies that sit on our TOG group.
And Mike, if I may, just really quickly. So I think the difference in hiring myself versus another marketing firm is that I've been boots on the ground for over 20 years with both marketing and operations of transit and mobility management programs. I have experience in every single one of the programs under the WPCTPA programs, so I know about all of them. And then also being boots on the ground, I've worked with seniors, persons with disabilities, persons of that are LEP languages, title, I know the Title VI. So it makes a difference just understanding, the folks that you're working with when you're out there marketing. So the strategy is sometimes a little bit different, like you all were talking about earlier, for different groups of people. So I just wanted to give you that bit of background.
Thank you, Jean. For the next item that I'd like to discuss is the short-range transit planning effort. As I had mentioned earlier, this was something that we weren't able to implement in fiscal year '22. However, it is something that we intend to start in fiscal year 2023, which is the upcoming fiscal year. And so the amount proposed, the $400,000, is essentially a carryover, which is included in the carryover revenues that has been programmed for this effort, that we will start with the transit operators and heavily involve them in this process. The next program is a minor program that we hope to help again grow post-pandemic, which is the bus subsidy efforts. We do have several different agreements in place with different social service agencies throughout Placer County to offer bus pass reimbursement. Essentially, if an agency purchases bus passes, we will reimburse them for those bus passes. That program hasn't been utilized a lot at all during the pandemic because there's been a significant decrease in demand for services, but we hope through our engagement and outreach efforts that are planned for next year that we'll continue to grow this program, and so we've budgeted accordingly. The next three programs, I would like to just provide a quick overview before introducing our next guest. Essentially, the South Placer Call Center, the Transit Ambassador, and mobility training programs are operated through a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, that the CTSA has with the City of Roseville to be operated by the Alternative Transportation Department. Those programs were adopted as part of a MOU, all three independent MOUs with a 5-year budget forecast, that the amounts that are shown there are consistent with those forecasts, except for the South Placer Call Center, which is actually a significant reduction from last year. And the reason behind that reduction to the call center's costs is because the City of Roseville has actually currently accrued an account balance for some of their CTSA programs from savings in the operations of their program. So what is intended is that those savings will be utilized in the next fiscal year for the call center, and then in the following fiscal year for the CTSA's budget, we would return back to the 5-year forecasts that were adopted as part of the MOUs. So that's why you see a little bit of a reduction in the call center costs from last year, which is going to be covered by the cost savings that Roseville has internally in their fund balance. For the other two program costs, the Ambassador and the mobility training programs, those have slightly increased. The increase is due to some additional staffing costs, which are contracted staffing costs that Roseville has with their subcontractors for these programs, as well as some additional marketing and advertisement costs. With that, I would like to actually introduce Mike Dewar, who is the City of Roseville's Alternative Transportation Program Manager, and he will be sharing a little bit about all three of the programs that I just mentioned before you.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, Chair Baker and board members. Mike Dewar, Alternative Transportation Manager for the City of Roseville. And as Mike noted, Roseville runs the Regional Transit Ambassador Mobility Training and South Placer Call Center programs on behalf of the Western Placer CTSA. We really appreciate the opportunity to provide you a little bit more information about these programs. The Transit Ambassador program, I'll start with that. That program recruits and trains volunteers who have knowledge of South Placer transit systems so that they can provide assistance and assurance to newer transit users. They do this while they're riding the bus, or for some volunteers, they attend community events with our staff. Currently, we have one ambassador that lives in Auburn, and we have the rest, 6 live in Roseville. But regardless of where they live, they all travel on the various South Placer transit systems, Roseville Transit, Placer County Transit, and Auburn Transit, and they're providing information on all three of those systems. The program, as you can see in fiscal year 21, was temporarily suspended during the pandemic. So because, number one, ridership levels were down, so the demand for the program was less, and number two, we did not want to unduly expose our volunteers, some of whom are elderly, out on the buses. Volunteer hours are now increasing in fiscal year 22, but they're not yet at pre-pandemic levels. And now that we are hopefully coming out of the pandemic, we will be beginning recruiting efforts and basically re-beginning recruiting efforts for additional volunteers. And we hope to ramp the program up in fiscal year 23. The mobility training program helps seniors and individuals with special needs learn how to safely and independently ride Roseville Transit, Placer County Transit, and Auburn Transit buses. Professional training, and this is paid professional training as opposed to volunteer ambassadors. Professional training is offered one-on-one or in group settings, and it addresses things like trip planning, reading schedules and maps, safety on the bus, fares, passes, and transfers. The trainers travel with the individual out on the systems until they are comfortable and confident making trips on their own. The training program can take anywhere from 10 to 30 hours per person or per group, depending upon that individual's schedules or their needs. Training numbers dropped off, as you can see, by about 70% in fiscal year 21 during the pandemic. But it has since rebounded in fiscal year 22 as more people are returning to riding our buses. And as you can see, we've trained people who are using all 3 bus systems in South Placer County. Now, the South Placer Call Center, that's a dynamic one-stop shop that responds to questions about transit, including trip planning. The call center also provides demand response booking services for Roseville Transit and Placer County Transit. That's not a service provided by Auburn Transit, though, so that's not provided by the call center, although we do provide information for Auburn Transit. In the near future, it's expected that the call center will also book rides for microtransit services that are planned for South Placer, especially for those customers without access or without the ability to use an app on a mobile phone. The call center, really the intention is to provide synergy between all the agencies and especially help customers when they're crossing jurisdictional boundaries and trying to make trips across those boundaries. This slide shows the number of calls that the center has received each year and the metric for the calls answered within specified times. Call volumes dropped by about 35% during the pandemic. And in response, we adjusted our staffing levels to save costs, and that did have a slight effect on the metrics during fiscal year 21. But the call volumes and the performance has since stabilized in fiscal year 22. So that concludes my notes on the South Placer Transit Center. We know that it's important to get the word out on all of these programs as we come out of the pandemic. And this slide lists some of the many ways that we do outreach to the public. There's a lot of digital formats. There's also some print. And then we also find it valuable to meet with people, especially seniors and other groups, in person. So we recently attended a Parkinson's support group meeting at Maidu Park in Roseville to talk with them about how transit can help their group with their particular needs. We will be attending the Placer County Protect Senior Resource Fair at Maidu in August, and the Recovery Happens event in Auburn in September, and an upcoming Teen Resource Fair in Rockland. So we're also working with Mike on new ways to conduct outreach. That includes participating with him and Gene in the WPCTPA regional marketing strategy that he just mentioned. And one of the outcomes we hope for is to develop an outreach toolkit that we can share with the other agencies, your agencies, so they can provide even more outreach for these programs. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board? Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Moving on, the next 2 items, the Placer 211, this is the 3rd year of funding commitment. Back in May of this year, actually, the CTSA board did approve us to pay for, I should say, a 3rd year of the Placer Rides 211 program. Placer 211 program. And that program essentially is the final year. That service, the third year is the final year of that service and our commitment to continue to fund that. The South Placer Transit Project funding actually is something that previously was programmed to support the upcoming South Placer Transit service that is operated by the city of Roseville. However, also previously this fiscal year, there was a funding commitment made by the Sparta board to assume the $75,000 cost that is needed to help support that program and its operations. So that is no longer being programmed in the CTSA's budget moving forward. Lastly, the major item for one of the programs at the CTSA, this is a new program that we are proposing for the fiscal year 2022-23 budget, which some of you actually may be familiar with, is our Sierra College Transit Pass and Transportation Network Company, or TNC, Rideshare Subsidy Program, which is what we hope to implement with the start of the fall semester classes in August of 2022. What this program offers essentially, and it's in partnership with the Placer County transit providers as well as the Nevada County transit providers and Sierra College for their campuses both here in Placer County and also in Nevada County, is a free transit pass for any eligible enrolled student to utilize at any time that they are enrolled in a Sierra College class. That's one component of the program. The TNC component essentially is also for eligible college students to utilize a subsidized ride or a discount off of one of their Uber or Lyft rides to or from a Sierra College campus in the evening hours when public transit services are not available. Again, they would have to be traveling to or from a Sierra College campus. Unlike in transit, with the free pass for transit, that is operable across any transit system at any time of the day, going anywhere as long as they're an enrolled eligible student. This is something that we are still working on with our transit partners that needs to be formally adopted, and we would be essentially bringing a separate MOU between us and Sierra College, or I should say the CTSA and Sierra College, to actually contribute our funding commitment that's being programmed in the budget for next year. So that'll come to you at a later meeting, hopefully in August is where we anticipate. The other thing, the important thing to note too, is that Sierra College would be the primary administrator of this program, and the way that the administrative side of things would work is that Sierra College would have an agreement with each participating transit operator to reimburse them for a portion of their transit fares lost by operating a free ride. So if they have $1 that they normally would charge the student, then Sierra College would subsidize for a portion of that ride, and we, the CTSA, would then repay Sierra College for a portion of that trip. The other component with TNC is that Sierra College would have an agreement with an Uber or Lyft, which we've been talking with, and that would be where Sierra College would reimburse a percentage or a portion of the Uber or Lyft ride, and then the CTSA would reimburse Sierra College. So Sierra College is the administrative hub, and the CTSA has, through this budget, would be committing some funding towards helping that program. And then, of course, there would be joint marketing and administrative efforts that all parties, the transit operators, Sierra College, and the CTSA would help with to promote this program ahead of fall of 2022. The last thing to mention, too, is that, again, we are still working out some of the details of the program, and we anticipate a fall launch in 2022. And so that is something that I'll be continuing to work with the transit operators on to flesh out further details, and we'll bring you more details at a later meeting when essentially you would adopt an MOU to commit funding from the CTSA towards Sierra College. The other thing is Sierra College is anticipating to commit funding towards this program, which approximately matches what we are committing, and then the transit operators, essentially, if they decide to participate through their respective governing authorities, they would be contributing a portion of their fares towards the program that they would not get reimbursed for. So that's how this program is essentially being funded, and it's based off of efforts that have been discussed and studies that have been done since 2019 to identify what percentage of students would be utilizing transit services, and that's how we estimated the program costs for this program. With that, for the last slide, we are proposing, as similar in past practices, to maintain a 15% operating reserve, which
Mr. Chairman, I did have some questions on the Sierra
Sure.
Transit, the Sierra College Transit Pass, if we were
Go
kind
for
of
it.
going along, so sorry about the interruption. Would the Uber and Lyft drivers sign up with Sierra College for participation in that project? Because it sounds like Sierra College would reimburse them, but would they sign up and have like a pool of drivers, or I'm just kind of curious about that.
So the drivers would still be drivers of Uber and Lyft. They wouldn't be affiliated with the college. When we've been speaking to Uber, Lyft, and those agreements still have to be adopted by the Sierra College board. But as we've been speaking with Uber and Lyft partners, they would essentially commit to trying to push or advertise rides at Sierra College for any of their affiliated Uber or Lyft drivers to go towards the college at certain times of the day. So similar to what you would see at maybe the airport when a plane lands, or when you go to Sac Airport and there's a bunch of Ubers and Lyfts waiting to pick up people as they come in from the airport. That's something that we've been talking to Uber and Lyft about, to try to get as many drivers as possible into the range of Sierra College when students may be coming out of classes in the evening. Again, it's going to be up to whatever supply there is and whatever demand there is. There are no guarantees or assurances that there will be a ride, but it is an opportunity we want to still test out and pilot as part of this program. And it is something similar that has been done in other colleges and universities throughout California.
That was the other question I had, is that, where else is this program utilized? I'm sure it's utilized in other areas. So I think it's a great program. Let's see if I have the other question. So really then Sierra College would commit some dollars as well. So it's not just us participating in that. I think it's a great program, really. It will be interesting with the Lyft and Uber drivers, because in our more remote areas, there aren't those drivers available. Forest Hill, I don't know about Colfax, but for those students, and especially in the after hours, but certainly appreciate the efforts. Thank you. Thank you.
So I have a question to add on to that then. So if Sierra College doesn't have the contract with Uber and Lyft, you said then the students could be reimbursed by the program? Is that what you were saying? No, how does that work then?
No, it would only work if there was the contract with Uber and Lyft.
Oh, so it's a potential.
Yes.
not done.
All of these details are still being worked out, but if we commit the funds now based on our funding estimates, we want to have that funding source available. But of course, we will bring back to this board an MOU once the details are fleshed out.
Oh, and the other thing is, and I think you mentioned that for the transit, the students could take the transit at any time. So if they have a job, it could be from their home to their work. It doesn't just have to be to school. So I really liked that too, that piece of it as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, board members? Okay.
To conclude my presentation, again, there is a maintenance of the 15% operating reserve, or approximately $304,000, that's proposed for this fiscal year budget. This budget was developed back in May with coordination among the TOG members, and then also brought back to the TOG and the Technical Advisory Committee at their June meetings on June 6th and 7th, respectively, where they recommended support for this item. With that, I'd be happy to conclude my presentation and answer any questions that you have regarding this item.
No questions. Any public comment? Or Trinity, do you have any questions? No public comment?
I do not. Sorry, I was having trouble coming off mute there.
Not a problem. No public comment? Perfect. Bring it back to the board for motion.
I move we approve the fiscal year FY 22-23 Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Service Agency budget as presented by staff.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Gore,
Aye.
Howdeshell,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to Director Lucan's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, just a couple items. And before I start, just thank you to the board for, normally we don't have this long of a presentation on the CTSA budget, but we had the time in this agenda to kind of go over a number of really important items, kind of a culmination of items that have been coming to you over the last couple of years. So appreciate your working with us on a long presentation, but these are, as you noted, very, very important programs to the community, and usually we don't have the luxury of discussing them in detail. Just a couple things to update you on. One is that at least at this time, we don't have anything planned for the July meeting, so which is normal for PCTPA. So unless the board has other items that wants us to bring back, we would recommend that the July meeting be canceled and dark, both for PCTPA and Sparta. A couple other items, we have an upcoming California Transportation Commission meeting, which is being held in Sacramento this year, and I think a number of you have received, and if you haven't, we will get it to you, an invitation from, I think, the Women in Transportation Symposium, WTS, to participate in a reception for that event next week. If you haven't got that, we will be happy to get that to you. So you could attend. But the regular meeting is again next week on the 29th and 30th. Normally, we attend these meetings, and Rick Carter on our staff will be attending this meeting, as I will be out of town. But we normally don't have a lot of items on the agenda. This agenda, we have actually 8 items on the CTSA, or on the CTC calendar, mostly related to our normal course of business related to the I-80 auxiliary lanes project, the Highway 49 gap closure project, and then lastly, in support of our member agency, the City of Roseville, related to the South Placer Transit project discussed earlier and the Dry Creek Greenway project. So we have a number of items on there. We're working closely with Commissioner Davis from the Rockland area on the CTC board to provide him some background on those items. But kind of a relatively heavy amount of items. Not that none of which are, with the exception of one item, are really controversial and are all supported by CTC staff. But again, it is unusual that we have so many items on that calendar. Wanted to, I guess maybe just recap our efforts. Last week, our staff spent a lot of time with SACOG on the Sacramento County Sales Tax Initiative, and a number of you were involved in that. And I think we achieved the best we could get, I guess, if you will, to get some language read into the record of that meeting, which protects the interests of Placer County. It's kind of, charting new territory because this is a citizens initiative as opposed to an agency-initiated sales tax measure. And so that is a big challenge in this, and we worked a lot of hours, and I know a lot of you worked a lot of hours to get this to that meeting last week, and I think, again, we achieved the best we can do at this point in time, which would be because whatever SACOG does with Sacramento County, it will be expected that we do with Placer County. And so we just had to make sure that, when we come up against these things, we are treated in a like manner. Our items, kind of the crux of the whole discussion was the fact that, or the determination whether their items are in the MTP SCS or not. Our items have always, in our expenditure plan has always stated that they have to be in the MTP SCS. And the reason being is that we leverage half of our expenditure plan with state and federal dollars, and it's impossible not to be in the MTP SCS. For whatever reason they did that in Sacramento County, that's their own business. But I want to assure you that we took a different route to make sure that our projects are in the MTP SCS, and the same with El Dorado County, our sister agency. I guess the last thing I'll mention is a couple things that SACOG is also doing that have been initiated, which is the SACOG Next Gen Transit Study. That study is going to look at a couple things that are really important to our efforts. One is a regional bus network, and so what that means is trying to connect the dots between the various transit services in the region so that they're timed accordingly, so that with somebody that takes Roseville Transit to connect to Sacramento Regional Transit, that those meet in a timely manner so a person can seamlessly go from one place to another. In the past, I think we've tried to do that, but it's not always ideal. So this is a major effort to do that and really to create a seamless system, if you will, that somebody doesn't need to know that they're, I mean, they will know, but they don't really, it's not necessary for them to know to get from say, Roseville to Elk Grove. They have to take 2 transit systems. It will be hopefully a seamless system, similar to what's being undertaken in the Atlanta area with MARTA, to allow a person to get easily where they're going. The other thing that's important in that study is they're going to be looking at a rideshare program similar to other communities in the southern San Joaquin Valley, where in rural areas, it has been, it's in those areas where it's very hard for us to provide transit, even things like Placer rides. But some communities in rural San Joaquin and Fresno counties have been able to, with grant funding, place a car in those communities. So it's kind of like van pooling, but they place a electric vehicle in those communities where a person who wants to take responsibility for that vehicle acts as kind of a ride share type of coordinator for that particular community, whether it's Forest, in our case Forest Hill or Sheridan, where it's very difficult for us to get people up there. So SACOG is going to be looking at that on a regional scale, and I think Placer County and Sutter County and Yuba County and Yolo County are very interested potentially in that service.
Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you get too far away from the SACOG discussion last week, I want to thank you. That was complex and convoluted, and you had to provide us briefings, but you were in the background. And so monitoring the conversation while you were doing something else. And I know Chair Gore was there. I was virtually there, but I really appreciated the level of detail and how you unpacked something that was very complex and made us understand the relevancy and the risk and the danger for us. So thank you.
Yes, we work very closely with Director Howdeshell, Director Joyner, and Director Gore on those efforts in particular. And I consider that part of my job to tell you how things affect Placer County.
I had a question on that. One of the comments you made about that meeting and your communication piqued my interest. So when you said that SACOG would expect Placer County to follow suit with whatever Sacramento County does, so my understanding of what's happening over there is, typically a transportation sales tax requires a 2/3 supermajority to pass. My understanding is that because they're pursuing a citizens initiative, that it may only require a 50% majority to pass. That may face a legal challenge or not, we'll see. Is what you're saying that if that citizens initiative passes in Sacramento County, that you think SACOG would expect us to somehow encourage a citizens initiative to occur here?
No, apologies for not kind of covering that aspect of it. It's really in the expenditure plan.
Okay.
And what do projects in the expenditure plan, what are their requirements?
Got it.
So no, I mean, certainly a citizens initiative may be an option in 2024, but we've been pretty focused on an agency initiated option because it is an unknown area, and that measure in Sacramento County will face a fairly stringent court test, potentially all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court when it's done, if it's approved by the voters. So we will wait and see if that's an option for us, but at least at this point we've been kind of laser focused on a 2/3 special tax. So.
Thank you.
That's all I have today.
Perfect. Board direction to staff. None. We have some informational items, and then we will adjourn to closed session.
And, Mr. Chair, just, I'm
Yeah.
gonna excuse myself from the closed session since I'm not a regular member, and based on the items, probably I'm not gonna be a whole lot of help.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
That would be fun.
We'll bring it back from closed session. And I think I will allow Director Lucan to give out the news.
There we go. Reporting out of closed session is that I will start the process on planning to retire. And from my position as Executive Director of PCTPA.
Well, Director Lucan, we thank you. Obviously, you're not going anywhere for a little while, but we really appreciate your efforts so far. And I think the recruitment process will start, and
It will start we have to hire a firm, but it will start in earnest right after the July 4th holiday.
perfect, appreciate it. Any comments from staff or from board? Okay, well, if that's it, we will call it adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.